The Progressive Caucus has retracted its Ukraine letter. This was a letter signed by 30 members of the Progressive Caucus calling for direct negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. These are 30 members of Congress who voted for $40 billion of aid to Ukraine, which provided the impetus for escalation. It was what brought the HIMARS systems into the Ukrainian battlefield and helped take the fight further to the civilians of Donetsk. They're responsible for that. They have the people portrayed here, Premia Jayapal, Barbara Lee, who was the only vote against the AUMF allowing the endless war in Afghanistan. Ilhan Omar, who's positioned herself as a pro-peace politician. They all have that blood on their hands voting for the $40 billion. And of course, AOC, who has been recently protested at her own town hall over this vote, and then attacked her protesters as not anti-war because she said they're right-wing. So you can't be anti-war if you're right-wing. And she called them Putin puppets, or, so after all of that disastrous display by these progressives who had convinced their constituents that they were for peace, they start to walk back and they start to say that we need to pull back from the brink of nuclear war. It actually says that in the letter. I was so happy that there was finally some space opening in Washington, because we get attacked constantly for actually being the moderates. All we want is a negotiated settlement to end this insane proxy war before it turns into a even hotter war and a nuclear war. And so less than 24 hours later, these complete spineless, gutless cowards retract the letter.
Can I point out the advertisement on the right side of the screen? Can we just? Did you see? Did anybody? Yeah. You go to read their news article about Ukraine, and it's a Lockheed Martin ad.
Well, there you go. I mean, who's paying Politico's bills?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that backfired, according to Politico. The Congressional Progressive Caucus retracted its letter calling on President Joe Biden to push for direct diplomacy with Moscow less than a day after it drew intense backlash from other Democrats. The about face, which Politico first reported was under consideration, comes as some Democratic lawmakers vent their fury that the letter backing talks with Russian President and Satan himself, Vladimir Putin, wasn't recirculated before its public release on Monday. So basically they wanted to water down the letter to the point where...
Have you read the actual press release?
I did, but maybe there's something I missed.
Well, they said it was released by staff without vetting.
Right.
And Premia Jayapal said, I accept responsibility for this. And our message is being conflated by some as being equivalent to the recent statement by Republican leader McCarthy threatening to end aid to Ukraine if Republicans take over. Threatening. He's threatening to end aid,
Right. No. Here's a great little tidbit from the Politico write-up. Ukraine is not ready for negotiations at this point, especially because its months-long counteroffensive has been successful to date.
Successful?
Aren't you? I mean, if it's successful, aren't you supposed to negotiate from a position of strength?
Yeah, it's ready to negotiate as soon as Daddy says it's ready to negotiate. And it's not like Ukraine is some separate entity from Washington at this point.
Yeah, I mean, but what Alex said is it's like they just, everything is backwards and they just say it when there's no shame there. They're so successful that why would they negotiate? It's like, Aaron, yes, if you were succeeding, then you'd be willing to negotiate because, you negotiate from a position of strength, not from weakness. But obviously, that's the opposite is true. They try to present this as the Ukrainians are winning massively because they have taken back over the past 7 months less than 10,000 square meters of the territory that was taken, the 120,000 plus square kilometers that was taken by the Russian Federation forces. They've taken back less than 10%. They're winning so badly, winning so incredibly that, why would they negotiate? It's just, there's no, everything is backwards now.
Aaron Mate, what do you make of this fiasco? Is there why is there no space for any Democrat to say anything about one of the most insane wars of our time?
Can you believe it? So the letter itself was so tepid, and it was written so ambiguously so that anybody could see something positive in it. So, for example, Matt Duss, who's a progressive proxy warrior, former advisor to Bernie Sanders, recently moved on to a DC think tank. He welcomed the letter initially. Thought it was great because the letter was written so it was so watered down that there really wasn't much there. The only thing different there that I could detect was at least they were calling on Biden to negotiate with Russia directly. And I'd never seen any major Democrats advocate that before. And they were tacitly acknowledging that Biden had refused to negotiate with Russia and calling on him to negotiate with Russia. That to me was the positive about that letter, even though it still contained 100% support for the proxy war. But even the call just to negotiate with Russia, which is still watered down with all these other caveats, like nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, they still affirm that. Even that wasn't enough to last 24 hours for them to retract and to throw their own staffers under the bus. Basically, if you read the letter from Pramila Jayapal, the statement, this is her second statement after issuing the first one. She blames staffers who rushed out the letter too quickly, which is just, that's not true. There's no way these staffers just went behind Pramila Jayapal's back and rushed out a letter after getting everyone's signature. And even some of the signatories are saying this is great that this was retracted. Like Jamie Raskin says, "Oh, I'm really glad that they pulled this letter," but you signed it. So what happened? Well, one thing that happened is Ilhan Omar, who was one of the original signatories, she said on Twitter today, she said this: "Timing is everything in public policy. Letters are written to respond to a moment, and in politics, moments pass in the speed of light. In this case, the letter was a response to intel we were getting on the war and the pathway forward." And what she means by that is that she signed this back in July or something like that. So she's suggesting that the letter was influenced by intel about the war they were getting back then, and things have changed somehow since then, that the intel has changed. And I'd love for her to share what that intel was, which of course she won't, because it's all just a scam. But look, even if you're going to make the argument that conditions on the ground has changed and now Ukraine somehow has a better chance of winning, what has happened since July? Well, yes, Russia lost in Kharkiv. They had to withdraw there. And they also had to withdraw in that town of Liman. But still, they still control about 20% of Ukraine. And what else has happened? Russia has escalated its attacks on civilian infrastructure inside of Ukraine. That wasn't happening back then. And also, Russia has called up 300,000 reservists, showing that for Russia, this is an existential war and that they're not going to back down. So the idea that somehow this is motivated by a change in the situation on the ground is just delusional. And what it says, going back to Max's question, is that if you remotely dissent from the policy of fighting Russia to the last Ukrainian in Washington, you will be harassed. And these people who put out this letter, like Pramila Jayapal and the signatories from the Congressional Progressive Caucus, are obviously so brittle that they can't handle even some criticism on Twitter from neocons. That's what this was, just an online freak out. And I'm sure behind the scenes too, they got a lot of heat as well. But
it was Bernie's people freaking out too. I mean, Matt Duss, Joe Cirincione, who's been who's a big NAFO supporter now and has been attacking me as a pro-Putin conservative on Twitter. I mean, they probably pushed back, but I mean, you mentioned, Aaron, that they were given intelligence assessments. I threw up the Ilhan Omar tweet on screen because I think you can read into it that there were intelligence briefings in the last 24 hours to get these progressives to walk back this statement and tell them, no, you don't understand. Ukraine is winning. They need victory, and you are interfering with the victory. And we are the intelligence community. And, as Chuck Schumer said during the Trump era, they have 100 ways to screw you till Sunday or something. So they basically got threatened by the spooks. That's my reading, Aaron.
Well, that's interesting. So she says in this particular case, the letter was a response to intel we were getting on the war and the pathway forward. So I guess, you know what? But the thing is, Max, I think she's referring to the original letter, not
okay.
the statement.
Right.
So I think she's saying that, but she is suggesting that they were getting intel back then that presumably has changed since then, if they've changed their position. But that doesn't mean also that they didn't get some pressure behind the scenes over the last 24 hours. I'm sure they did. So I think what you're saying is totally plausible, that maybe people who have access to the quote unquote intelligence came and pressured them and said, this, what you're doing is wrong. We have a chance to win. But like, regardless, the fact that, like, what are they retracting? It's a call for diplomacy. That's it. They weren't even saying we're going to stop funding the proxy war. And in fact, they reiterated right afterwards that they're all going to keep voting to support the proxy war. That's what Pramila Jayapal did. So all they're saying is simply talk to Russia. And even that couldn't be countenanced in Washington.
Yeah.
Well, Mark Pocan.
Wait a minute. Sorry to cut in. It can be countenanced in Washington only among the MAGA conservatives. And there is a revolt within the Republican Party over this war. It's not a Republican thing. Most members of the Republican Party are down with the Uniparty on this war. And you've got all these candidates like Joe Kent in Washington who are running on the war.
Yeah, that's true. Joe Kent has called for diplomacy with Russia, but I don't think calls for diplomacy are really a popular cry from Republicans right now. Yes, some Republicans have voted against proxy war funding, but I haven't seen a big push from them either for diplomacy, except for Joe Kent. I mean, he's an exception. He wants to basically isolate Russia from China because he wants to take on China. So the political spectrum we have is just, I've never seen it so pathetic. I mean, it was already pretty pathetic when you have Democrats who are elected to take on the establishment, to claim to oppose endless wars and the military-industrial complex. There was a time when Bernie was talking about the military-industrial complex, although he's dropped that. To see them vote in lockstep for this proxy war, right? That's one level of just being pathetic. But then, when they finally, like nearly a year into this thing, when they put out a tepid call for diplomacy, they can't even hang with that for 24 hours before it has to be retracted. That says a lot about where we're at.
Well, the difference is the Republicans are actually somewhat responsive to their base. The base wanted Trump, and they got Trump. We wanted Bernie. What did we get? And not that the Democrats, the Democratic base is particularly anti-war. In some cases, they are like the most vehement supporters of proxy war with Russia. They've spent the past 6 years of their life getting their whole identity twisted up with the idea that Russia is the devil and Russia is single-handedly responsible for every problem in my life. Russia got Trump elected. Russia has bounties out on U.S. soldiers, blah, 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 blah. And now, you want to hear a dissenting opinion about this, you have to go to the Republican Party, apparently, because the Democrats just have no spine. I mean, Mark Pocan also wrote this just pathetic mea culpa on Twitter. He said, somebody told him there's big problems with this letter. Some Russian professor, big problems with this letter from Democratic members of Congress, including my own congressman, Mark Pocan. It's asking the Biden administration to do things that's already doing, some others that are counterproductive. He said, I hear you. This is what you get from Democrats. These are the people they hear. They hear you and see you. I hear you. First, this was written in July. I have no idea why it went out now. Bad timing. And he says, I've supported the efforts and will continue. Overanalyzed by some. And then he got attacked by some NAFO troll as well. Tell WAPO to retract the article, explain the timing. He said, sloppy article with a photo looking like we had a press conference from a completely different topic. We have reached out. So they're reaching out now to the Washington Post to get them to retract or edit their article in some way to prove that they are not, pro-diplomacy with Vladimir Putin.